There are over 10 million online searches each month for information regarding domestic violence in just the US and Canada. Anyone, regardless of gender, sexuality, race, or religion, can experience abuse. Domestic abuse isn't always physical violence. It can be emotional, verbal, even financial. It can feel isolating and hopeless. For victims, it often takes several attempts to escape an abusive partner. There are many reasons victims are often afraid to reach out for help, including embarrassment or denial, being isolated from family and friends, or fear of losing their children. But if you're experiencing abuse, you're not alone. It's not your fault. Help is here for you. domesticshelters.org is the leading domestic violence online resource where abuse victims and survivors can find everything they need to take steps towards safety, all in one place. With domesticshelters.org's searchable database of domestic violence programs and shelters in the US and Canada, anyone can find a nearby trained advocate who cares, along with support and resources. Victims of abuse may not be ready to connect with an advocate yet, but with domesticshelters.org's comprehensive library of relevant and high-quality content, it's simple to find information that can help change lives for the better. Domestic violence professionals and advocates rely on domesticshelters.org for ways to better support their local communities through free online expert-led training, award and grant programs, donation tools, and other powerful resources. The profound impact of domestic violence hurts everyone. Victims lose hope. Children suffer lifelong trauma. Communities are permanently damaged. That's why millions of people come to domesticshelters.org to get the answers and help that they need, and why 8 out of 10 domesticshelters.org visitors share their newfound knowledge with others, exponentially increasing public awareness of abuse. Your support helps connect those millions of victims and survivors of domestic violence with the resources they need to identify, escape, and heal from abuse. If you aren't sure where to turn, we're here to help you feel safe again, wherever you are on your journey. Please visit us at domesticshelters.org.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Ashley Rumschlag. I am the CEO and president of Teresa's Fund and domesticshelters.org. I am joined today by our Senior Digital Services Specialist, Rachel Myers, and our Vice President of Content, Hannah Craig, who will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A throughout today's presentation. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We do have live closed captions for today's webinar. To enable, please click More in the menu bar and click Show Subtitles. A transcript will also be available within a week of the presentation. And as an attendee of today's webinar, you are in listen-only mode, so your camera and your video are turned off. And please use the Q&A box to ask questions for today's presenter. If you would like to communicate with other attendees or the panelists, please put that information in the chat box. And just a reminder, so we'll send out the certificate, transcript, a recording of the webinar, and any additional resources shared throughout the presentation within 1 week. And just a reminder, if you haven't already heard about the nomination period opening up for the Purple Ribbon Awards, this is our third year for the program, and we are now accepting nominations through the end of February, so February 28th. And the program is going to recognize, all the different heroes of the domestic violence movement, whether that be, people that are working directly with survivors, legislative leaders, medical professionals. Really, there's a wide array of categories, over 30 categories this year. We added a new category for medical professionals as well as blogs. You can learn more about the Purple Ribbon Awards at purpleribbon.awards.org. And then save the date. We'll send that registration link a little bit closer to the date, but we do have another webinar coming up here in February, on February 23rd. That's going to be the same time, so 1 p.m. Eastern time, and that's presented by Adam Dodge of NTAB. We're going to talk about when domestic violence goes digital. Okay, and there's our contact information. So if we have anyone here today that's just calling in, so they're not using their computer to view this, and please email us at info@domesticshelters.org, and we'll add you to the list. But if you are seeing this email address right now on your screen, please know that we do have your email address, so you don't need to reach out. You're already on the list. All right. We are so thankful for the sponsorship of CAP 60. One moment, I'm going to read a little bit about their software here. So without their support, we wouldn't be able to put this webinar on today. So CAP 60 is the #1 software solution for victim services agencies. Utilizing their fully encrypted system, you could easily input and access each client's sensitive information. When it comes to reporting, seamlessly export all client demographics, services, unduplicated client counts, and other key metrics to satisfy funder requirements. Some of the additional perks of the CAP 60 solution include victim and offender tracking, a centralized intake process, shelter and transitional housing automation, outreach and volunteer management, hotline call tracking, counseling and legal silos, and all funder reports, including VAWA, VOCA, VIPSPA, and the CAPER report. Stick around after the webinar if you'd like to see a demonstration of their software and learn more. So Sean from CAP 60 is going to be joining us following today's presentation. All right. So we are so grateful to have Tonya Lovelace here today. She's going to be talking about full humanity, centering intersectionality in all DV services. Welcome, Tonya. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Ashley. I'm really grateful to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
All right. I will get started. Thank you all so much. So yes, my name is Tonya Lovelace, and I'm grateful to be here with you today. I am going to be presenting on full humanity, centering intersectionality in all DV services. And look forward to receiving your questions and having a robust conversation. So let's get started. So first, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. Well, first, I'd like to just take a deep breath. I encourage you all to do that as well. All right. So I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. I'm presenting from Maryland, and the location that I'm in are the homelands of the Piscataway and the Anacostia Nations. This also happens to be the birthplace of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. I'd like to welcome Asian and Pacific Islander communities, Latin and Hispanic communities, Black, African, and Afro-Caribbean communities, Arab and Middle Eastern communities, and white and aspiring allies as well. Really looking forward to engaging with you today. Arms are open for LGBT communities, people with disabilities, both visible and hidden, immigrant and refugee people, and everyone across the lifespan. So excited for this discussion. Again, my name is Tonya Lovelace, and I am a global intersectional leader, meaning that I've been in many places around the world having conversations around intersectionality. I am a movement maker, a facilitator, a lecturer, and a coach, as well as a mother. And I have worked for nearly 40 years as a community organizer and advocate to amplify and expand the leadership and voices of Black and Brown people, women of color, and non-binary people. So this is something that I've been doing for a very long time, and it just felt like a great opportunity and great synergy when Ashley reached out to ask me to present. So what I intend to do today is to explore intersectionality in theory and in practice with you, and then to also define and discuss ways to learn about the full humanity of people on your staff and survivors that you are helping. So defining full humanity. This has been an exercise I actually was grateful to do as a part of this discussion. The reason why I even am using this phrase is I was interviewed for an article that was written by that was written for domestic shelters. And the article is entitled "The Ways Racism Fuels the Fire of Domestic Violence." And one of the quotes from that stood out for me that I said, didn't remember saying, but really sat with me, was "Any brand of justice that does not take the full humanity of people into consideration causes harm." And so I decided to use that as a framing for our conversation today, and really wanted to think about what full humanity is. And so I did some Google searches and pulled together some terms. And so with that said, you will receive the PowerPoint afterwards, and you'll get a chance to click on all of the links so you can see the place where I pulled some of the words from, and then others just come from other thinking that I did about what to do here. So I developed a little bit of a model. So as we consider and think about those that we serve, we can consider this this person with her arms stretched out. I'm assuming pronouns are she, her, possibly. I'm going to use that for her, but her pronouns may be they, them. This may be a person whose pronouns are he, him. This may be a person who whose pronouns are their name. But this person is standing before you, right? And the question is, how do you support this person? And first, you have to know that as a person, a part of what they'll be looking for is belonging, and really being able to connect as a social being, and to have meaningful relationships with others. That this person has community, will want to be in community, and has a longing to be a part of something bigger than themselves. That this person has creativity and will want to express that in some ways, and that it really reinforces their imaginations in their lives. You may know that they have curiosities, that they are inquisitive, and that they may want to understand how some things work, including some of the systems you're walking through. That this is a person that has a purpose, and they may need room and space to talk about what that purpose is, and even to flesh it out, but that they are a person with a purpose and a mission. This person has family, hopefully in some way, chosen family, chosen loved ones, or connections, and that it's hardwired in our DNA as humans to want to have some type of connection. You would know that they would want love some way in their lives, and that, again, it's a strong chemically induced emotion that we have as humans, and that we have memory, and that our brains are receptacles of the past, and so they'll be bringing memories with them to the table, some of them painful, some of them positive, but things that that really help to motivate them. That they will engage in some type of storytelling, and the way that storytelling is comfortable for them. And so you'll want to understand their story, and you'll want to hear their voice, and recognize them and who they are in their unique way. Also, you'll want to recognize and understand their race, and know that that most likely in some way has an impact in their lives. Whether they are a person of color, or identifies in a specific marginalized community, and also whether they are a person who may have privilege in that context. You'll want to know if this person is how they identify in terms of their gender identity. You'll want to know their sexual orientation in some way, and their age, their whether they have disabilities, if they are, and of course, all of this is by choice, right? But in some engagement, these things matter in terms of who a person is, what their economic background and experience is, what languages that they speak, what their locality is, and where their sort of home base is, and how they move in their body, and how they experience their body. You'd also want to know about their spirituality. For a lot of folks, that's really key for them. You'd want to understand what their educational background is, if that makes sense in your work with them. You'll want to know their beliefs and their knowledge, goals, ideas, vision, dreams, hopes, values, this is what makes up humanity. I'm sure that there are so many other words that you can throw in here as well, but really understanding a person's full humanity is really understanding these layers to them and several layers to them. And it's helpful to know that in your services, and it's helpful to know that in your staff, and knowing the people that are with you and wanting to know them beyond the surface is a key thing. You'll also want to know their fears, their needs, their barriers, their hurts. Those things also comprise a person's humanity. And so when thinking about a person's full humanity, then what is intersectionality? Professor Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality in 1989, as she would say, by building upon lots of work that was done by people throughout the years, many folks going back centuries, that had talked about layered identities. So she was not the first one to do it, but she came up with a term that was really helpful in the case that she was working on. And so she talked about it in a paper that she released, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Sex and Race, Race and Sex. And the article centered on 3 legal cases that involved Black women. And because of the conceptual limitations of single issue analyses, the court system only recognized either sexism or racism and not both simultaneously. So these were Black women that were needing support in their employment circumstances. And the courts only wanted to work with them and acknowledge either their race or their sex, and not both at the same time. And a part of their argument was that that's not something that you would do, basically that women should only have gender as a focus and would show up with that as a need, that and that people of color would only show up with that as a need and that as a focus. But what was really framed there is that men of color in this way would be a person who would not necessarily need to bring gender to the table, and white women would be a group that would not necessarily need to bring race to the table. And so there was really no room to talk about this person, these 3 people, these Black women that actually had these overlapping identities of Black womanhood that could not be pulled apart, and in fact are inextricably tied and made them who they are. And so this is a video from Kimberly Crenshaw in her own words, where she can talk a little bit about it as well.
Many years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems like racism and sexism are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice. Now, the experience that gave rise to intersectionality was my chance encounter with a woman named Emma DeGraffenreid. I actually read about Emma's story from the pages of a legal opinion written by a judge who had dismissed Emma's claim of race and gender discrimination against a local car manufacturing plant. She applied for a job and she was not hired, and she believed that she was not hired because she was a Black woman. And the argument for dismissing the suit was that the employer did hire African Americans and the employer hired women. The real problem, though, that the judge was not willing to acknowledge was what Emma was actually trying to say, that the African Americans that were hired, usually for industrial jobs, maintenance jobs, were all men. And the women that were hired, usually for secretarial or front office work, were all white. Only if the court was able to see how these policies came together would he be able to see the double discrimination that Emma DeGraffenreid was facing. But the court refused to allow Emma to put 2 causes of action together to tell her story, because he believed that by allowing her to do that, she would be able to have preferential treatment. She'd have an advantage by being able to have 2 swings at the bat when African-American men and white women only had one swing at the bat. But of course, neither African-American men or white women needed to combine a race and gender discrimination claim to tell the story of the discrimination they were experiencing. Why wasn't the real unfairness, law's refusal to protect African-American women simply because their experiences weren't exactly the same as white women and African-American men? Rather than broadening the frame to include African-American women, the court simply tossed their case completely out of court. So first of all, Black women weren't allowed to work at the plant. Second of all, the court doubled down on this exclusion by making it legally inconsequential. And to boot, there was no name for this problem. And we all know that where there's no name for a problem, you can't see a problem. And when you can't see a problem, you pretty much can't solve it. Many years later, I'd come to recognize that the problem that Emma was facing was a framing problem. The frame that the court was using to see gender discrimination or to see race discrimination was partial and it was distorting. For me, the challenge that I faced was trying to figure out whether there was an alternative narrative, a prism that would allow us to see Emma's dilemma, a prism that would allow us to rescue her from the cracks in the law, that would allow judges to see her story. So it occurred to me, maybe a simple analogy to an intersection might allow judges to better see Emma's dilemma. So if we think about this intersection, the roads to the intersection would be the way that the workforce was structured by race and by gender. And then the traffic in those roads would be the hiring policies and the other practices that ran through those roads. Now, because Emma was both Black and female, she was positioned precisely where those roads overlapped, experiencing the simultaneous impact of the company's gender and race traffic. The law was like that ambulance that shows up and is ready to treat Emma only if it can be shown that she was harmed on the race road or on the gender road, but not where those roads intersected. Heterosexism, transphobia, xenophobia, ableism, all of these social dynamics come together and create challenges that are sometimes quite unique.
Okay, so I'm going to go further then into the actual definition of intersectionality from Kimberly Crenshaw specifically as well. And intersectionality is a lens, a prism for seeing the ways in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other, right? And then we tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigrant status. What's often missing is how some people are subject to all of these at the same time, and not just the sum of its parts. And so what is intersectionality? Intersectionality begins with the recognition that we all have multiple and layered identities. However, it centers on the deepest of the intersections and the margins of identity, basically those who are living at the margins of the margins. And so it isn't looking at the compounding privileges that some people may have, where they may have where they may have dominant identities in certain communities. But it's looking at how it actually goes further into the intersections of disprivilege and a lack of access. And it decenters single issue approaches, which says that it's really not a full centered approach to only work on gender, or only to work on race, or only to work on sexual orientation, but that one would need to, even if you have a road that you start, you'd have to immediately begin looking at where the lines cross those communities to understand all of the people that can be impacted and the different ways that they can be impacted. It decenters privilege so that that is the least of the focus, where the greater focus is on those that are at the margins. And it assumes that those on the margins can represent on behalf of identity groups and are not hybrid. So meaning that that you are not leaving people out by doing that work at working with folks who are at the deepest of the margins, because you actually are representing communities, all communities, when you are doing that. And when you're not doing that, when you're working with people who have compounded privilege, then you are leaving people out. And so the focus there is to not see that as somehow not representing. And it also means that if you are asked to have someone be a representative and to speak, that by having a person who crosses over several identities it's not to say then that person isn't still representative of the original identity you were asked to bring forward. Folks usually go for the default, which would be, in this case, as was stated, Black men, white women. And what this is saying, let's look at various folks that can represent men, various folks that can represent women, and continue. And so challenges those with layers of privilege to self-locate and no longer uphold implicit identity, which is what I'm saying again, this identity that says that all one identity is this and all of one identity is that. It really causes people to self-locate and to see where there are several others in the same space. And it sets a clear priority to end patriarchy, Eurocentricity, capitalism, and other isms simultaneously. Intersectionality is not a simple listing of identities. It isn't to just say, oh, we're doing intersectional work because we are doing this and this. It's not just a simple listing of identities, and it's not intended to amplify the experiences of those with compounded privilege. So it means that when you're having an intersectional conversation, you're actually looking to talk about those who are experiencing challenges and barriers at those intersections, at multiple intersections at the same time. That is intersectionality. And so she also referenced inequality in her definition. And so I want to speak quickly about inequality. It is the quality of being unequal or uneven based on social disparity or disparity of distribution of opportunity or a lack of evenness or the condition of being in those circumstances. And so by using that definition, then we can say that racial inequality is the quality of being unequal or uneven due to race. We could say then that gender inequality is a quality of being unequal or uneven due to gender. We can say that gender identity inequality is a quality of being unequal or uneven due to a person's gender identity. Sexual orientation, the quality of being unequal or uneven due to sexual orientation. Disability inequality, the quality of being unequal or uneven due to, oh, that says class. I will fix that before you all get the last PowerPoints, because that should say disability. And then class inequality, and it says class again. I think I got really excited about the copy and paste, but I will, oh no, that is supposed to say class. Hilarious. So class is perfectly placed there in the definition. So I list all of those out because I utilized what Kimberly Crenshaw was demonstrating, and I came up with a visual that could be useful to us. So you have this person, right, who lives at the intersection of race inequality, gender inequality, class inequality, disability inequality, gender identity inequality, and sexual orientation inequality streets. In all of those circumstances, this person is often invisibilized because many of those identities, I virtually would say all of them, sometimes fail to go past the layer of those who are actually sitting at the table with compounded privilege, who may have this in common with them, but have other privileges that are not sitting at those multiple identities that this person is experiencing in terms of multiple injustices. So we're going to come back to this person who is sitting at this intersection of all of these identities. Another visual to share is, or another way to look at it is, a single issue prism, as she says, that intersectionality pushes us and encourages us to move beyond a single issue focus. And so often in our work on domestic violence, gender is the base. In fact, we've moved to gender-based violence is the language that we use for not just DV, but other forms of violence that is based on gender inequality or how gender is used as a power tool within the context. And so I think for many years, we've moved with this approach. And there are other ways in which groups have worked on race and have often moved forward with that in various ways as well. There's a history of that as well. And what has begun to happen in some spaces, some groups have transformed to really include and look at gender and race at the same time. And then you have people who experience gender and race inequality at the same time who've also created organizations. So some of these folks are in the organizations that have only been focusing on gender or only focusing on race. And then there are also groups that have come together that work on those issues at the same time. We have people that are working on sexual orientation and gender and race in their various spaces with very little overlap. And a good thing is that there are people, of course, who have these identities at the same time, who hopefully we are moving towards more people being represented in those spaces that are addressing race and gender and sexual orientation, with these folks visible and participating. And there are groups that are focusing on these issues simultaneously that support those who experience these identities at the same time. There are groups, again, that are working on these issues and also gender identity included here as a group that may be, there may be organizations focusing on that or focusing on maybe sexual orientation and gender identity at the same time. And we have individuals whose identities include all of those identities there and should be represented and visible in those spaces and should be considered in any of the work that's being done. And there are groups that are also working to support these individuals from their own experiences. Again, we're looking at disability, and groups that are doing disabilities work are also there. And the hope is that folks who sit at the intersections of all of these identities, including disability, are at those tables, their voices are heard, and hopefully there is more engagement. And there are groups and spaces where folks are looking at these for those individuals themselves are looking at these experiences for themselves and creating their own spaces. And then if we add class here, there are spaces that are working on economic justice and doing various pieces there. And the hope is that there would be more opportunity for people who experience these identities at the same time to be at those tables. That does not mean, and then there are groups that are also specifically formed for those communities by and for those communities that serve and address their own issues that specifically support those areas as well. I think I'm being brought to speak on domestic shelters because even though I keep saying you would hope that this is the thing that's happening, we do know that there are many groups that still have some room to go, right? Have some ways to go to really begin to move beyond the single issue prism and have remained in a place where it is the exception, or it is a special project, or it is something that is a new thing at the table. It's the last thing brought in. It's the first thing that leaves the table when resources are low. And so the goal here is to begin to center these folks so that more of our groups are focusing on these individuals at the same time and are beginning to expand their services in a way that are meeting expansive identities. And so this is loosely based on another presentation that Kimberly Crenshaw did. But let's look at this person that sits at all of these different intersections, right? What if a survivor was left stranded alone, dealing with crisis on Intersectional Street, where multiple streets overlap, right? No one saw how they were left there, but all the identity relief squads show up with their resources to help. And the disability squad shows up and says, I guess her race made this happen. I'm going to leave her here to you. And then the person who, the race squad shows up and says, I guess her gender made this happen. I'm going to leave her here to you. And then the gender squad shows up and says, I guess her gender identity made this happen. I'm going to leave her here to you. And then the gender identity squad shows up and says, I guess her sexual orientation made this happen. I'm going to leave her here to you. And then the sexual orientation squad shows up and says, I guess her class made this happen. I'm going to leave her here to you. And then the class squad shows up and says, I guess her lot in life made this happen. I'm going to leave her here because I don't know what to do, right? And I am not saying, again, that there aren't a lot of these groups that do already naturally formulate partnerships and so forth, but I'm sure that a lot of tables are still leaving gaps, right? And so in this case, the survivor is left stranded when she just needed someone to acknowledge her and help, right? And so what kind of ally are you, is what Kimberly Crenshaw asked. And she said, are you a please be one-dimensional so I can understand you ally? Is that the type of ally you're going to be? Or are you look the other way because I can't handle all the traffic this client has ally? And it could be that, are you, it depends on who's watching ally, whether or not you're going to show up, because there are people at the table who will acknowledge that you're not acknowledging them. So you will address it. When those folks are not there, you tend to relax on that issue. Are you a, but I can't have her more than any other, I can't give her more than any other client ally that says, well, this person needs these additional things, but I'd have to give that to everybody if I did that. Rather than looking at it from an equity standpoint, you are looking at it from a scarcity standpoint. Is that the type of ally you are? Or are you a, she keeps getting stranded there, so it must be her lot in life ally? This is just where she is. She continues to show up this way. Or are you a leave her here because it's better for all the other clients ally? These are questions that I imagine come up in a lot of the things that we do, and not just around these issues, but even around other structural issues, right? And other forms of oppression. And all of this are things we should be asking ourselves. Kimberly says we need, Dr. Crenshaw says, we need allies firmly planted in the intersections, the ones who will say, I don't care. She's in the middle of the road. Let's get her help and let's prevent this from happening again. Intersectionality requires you to be a different kind of ally, one that will go to the mat, one that will give her a ride, not only to her destination, but all the way to her destination. One that will seek power, not to exercise it for your own ends, but for the ends of women and disempowered people all over the world. And so another part that Kimberly, that Dr. Crenshaw also mentioned, is intersectional framing of an approach, right? And so in this case, let's pull out gender inequality, right? And so in this way, she's saying that if you all have come together, because gender inequality was the initial reason that brought you all together. So let's look at our DV movement and say we're all together because of this. Then you can use Gender Inequality Street, right? You can use this as a coalition building space, right? Where you can build your analyses to say then, what does it mean to add these other populations? And so if you imagine gender as a highway, it's not just a matter of women experiencing DV, but how do women at the deepest of the margins experience womanhood and DV, right? And how do they experience it differently? You can apply this same approach to all of the others if we were to lift out race as the highway or disability as the highway, right? So in this case, if we have gender inequality as the highway, but then we place race on there, then we can say, okay, let's use this as a coalition builder to say, gender is experienced this way by folks who by folks who are people of color. You can build it even further and say, and gender is experienced this way when we have a conversation and have to talk about gender and need to talk about gender identity. And not just that, but then let's look at sexual orientation within that context as well. And then gender can be a foundational place to also talk then about what happens then with gender when you layer disability there, and what happens then with gender when you layer class inequality there. So it doesn't have to be this thing where we're abandoning gender by having the conversation. You can use gender as the galvanizing tool, as the place to do it, as the foundation, and then see how these other things overlap so that you've fully built out your gender table, fully built out your gender analysis, your gender approach. If this isn't something that's being done, then your gender approach is then lacking in these areas. And so that's another way to look at it. And I say this because I'm a member of some of those groups. And in some of those groups, I've been in spaces where we haven't brought forward all of those intersections. So I really speak up here as somebody who is on a daily basis learning and understanding this. And so I want to talk briefly about the NSFIS data, and I'm looking at the time and I realize I've got lots and lots of slides. Yes, I hear you coming through, Ashley. Yes, so I am going to do my best to get through as many of them as possible. You will have the slides so you can look at them for yourself as well. But the NSFIS data then, if we're talking about how gender inequality, specifically in the case of domestic violence, is experienced across community, then we would have to, it would be something would be most certainly would be center stage, would be understanding that almost 2/3 of non-Hispanic multiracial women experience domestic violence or IPV at 63.8%. Non-Hispanic, American Indian, or Alaskan Native women experience it at 57.7%. Non-Hispanic Black women at 53.6%. Non-Hispanic white women at 48.4%. Hispanic women at 42.1%. And Hispanic, Asian, and Pacific Islander women at 27%. I also want to be clear, this is a great survey, and there are lots of other surveys and places where people collect data in a way that meets people where they are. And so this data is good, and the data probably looks differently in some, which is why you often see a scale of data. And so I'm going to try to breeze through some of these collective experiences that women of color experience in terms of disparities, just as we're thinking then about what does it mean for some, as we said at the beginning, or as I said a couple of slides ago, those who are experiencing gender inequality, but also experiencing from a race and ethnicity perspective experiencing inequality in those identities. What are some of the common factors that those communities have? And so while women from Asian, African, Native, and Latin cultures face specific challenges in their own communities, there are some common themes, such as a strong personal identification with family, right? And how important family is to them, but also hierarchy, right? And so some of that plays into their experience together. Religious beliefs and their faith. Often can be a place of solace and relief and liberation. It can also be used as a place and as a site of victimization and used as a form of abuse by their abuser or by the person causing abuse. And then there's fear of isolation and alienation from their cultural communities, and a guarded trust to discuss private matters, and a loyalty to their immediate community, their immediate family, and to their race and culture, and having a yoke of silence, a fear of rejection from their family and friends and culture and community and their church and their faith congregations or spaces. Individual needs often defer to family unity and strength. So they may set it aside, their own needs, for the greater good in this case. And and I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I am saying that it is a part of the process. And also distrust of law enforcement, which you will see is a theme that keeps going throughout this, and not just for them, but for their loved ones and their partners and the person that may be causing harm. And for immigrant and undocumented women in particular, is a fear of threat. And in all of these cases, there's been evidence, right, that demonstrates that there's a reason to be worried about a threat of deportation or separation from family, and a distrust or skepticism of shelter. And so I'm going to start moving through these pretty quickly, because you're going to have the links where you can go on and read this. I have a series of documents I'm going to show you from specific, culturally specific organizations, so you can see some of the information. And so for Indigenous women, Indigenous communities, many they have been holding space for and talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and building a national movement to restore safety for Indigenous women. And so there's a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women as a result of the limitation placed on tribal authority to prosecute non-natives for crimes committed on tribal land. And this actually has created a public safety crisis. And so some of the data that shows that that's probably the highest number across women of color of violences and murder has shown up around Indigenous women. And so 56% have experienced sexual violence. And there's a lot of data here, and that Indigenous women are being murdered at much greater rates as well. And so, and there's more to talk about here as well. And so additional pieces are that inaction has created a challenge where there's government inaction and cultural, and when I say cultural, I mean like the broader US culture and Canada and around the world, right? So missing Indigenous and missing and murdered Indigenous women is a global issue. And so to shift from inaction to action, there's a national movement. The National Indigenous Women's Resource Center has really been one of those groups that have been really encouraging folks to step forward and to address and to look at missing and murdered Indigenous women, and several other groups. And they're saying, right, that we must replace inaction and silence with an urgency to act, and to move from no action to a yes crisis mode response, right? And also a proactive response. And so that's one set of information. I wanted to speak on, Stop AAPI Hate, and this space, this organization that's been doing great work in addition with the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. And so some of the information that they shared here is that AAPI women were already prime targets for hate and discrimination against AAPI communities, and the numbers have been high for a long time, and that AAPI women and girls report hate incidents at 2.2 times as often as AAPI men, and AAPI non-binary people also have high rates. AAPI women and girls were experiencing a great deal of this in spaces such as the workspace and other spaces, and live at these multiple intersections that we've been talking about, and that the rates have continued to get higher. So you can look at the data there, but I pulled another AAPI document and wanted you to know more about the A to Z advocacy model from API GBV. And just a few notes from there is that the API advocates for few decades now have been developing their own approaches, and this model sought to sort of have a galvanizing place to see all the things from A to Z that API communities are doing. And API groups are equipped to address the diversity of API communities, which is 40 countries and more, and various identities and languages, as well as, again, here's the range where I say that the data shows that 21 to 55% of Asian women experience DV, and that's because a lot of the data isn't collected in a way where their voices may be heard. And so, and then there are specific barriers that I've already mentioned about threats of deportation, abusive international marriages that include survivors' loss of custody of children due to limited English proficiency. So these are specific reasons and specific experiences that API women are experiencing. And then here's some information on Latinas and Latin community. And so, again, there's not a lot of good data for Latinas because of the way it's been collected. And I've already mentioned that that there's better data when people are receiving it and ask the questions in a way that it can be better shared. But 1 in 3 Latinas will experience IPV in their lifetime. There's great data here about pregnant Latinas, as well as an interesting piece here that demonstrates that Latinas found that 14% of participants reported problems in accessing IPV services due to immigration issues, some reporting that they were denied services for proper ID. So people are still, having challenges in 2023 to get access. And some of the reasons for low rates in seeking help is because they much prefer to tell their own community or loved ones. And then nearly half of Latinas in one study did not report abuse to the authorities for lots of reasons. And one study found that only 1 in 4 Latinas had heard of IPV protection orders, so didn't even know they could get protection orders. I'm moving through. I would also say that it's important to center and talk about violence against transgender women of color, and noting that there are different forms of vulnerability that transgender women of color experience all at the same time, as I've been alluding to with the different layers of identity through the diagram. And Black transgender women comprise 66% of the 202 cases of fatal violence between 2013 and 2020. And so many responses to anti-transgender violence centers on law enforcement, when we know that law enforcement is a large part of the group that is perpetrating violence against transgender women of color. And Nell Gaither, who is the president of Trans Pride Initiative in Dallas, said that Black trans people face more discrimination and violence because they have less access to education, employment, housing, and healthcare and services. And what I often say in presentations is that those who seek to cause harm go to those places where nobody's watching, right? And so transgender people may be one of those places where nobody's watching, and folks are being harmed, and that they're not being protected by law enforcement in public spaces. And there is no anti-discrimination laws against transgender people, not federal. And so there continues to be these challenges. And if they are, it's attached to something, but it's not a blanket support. And the last thing I'm going to say on this is that even DV shelters, right? DV programs are creating barriers, legal, functional barriers for transgender people to get services. I want to speak about African-American women and IPV agency, and to say that Black women are more than twice as likely as white women to be killed by IPV. And their average age of murder is 36, which is 6 years younger than the national average. And they may not engage generally in the criminal legal system until things are super lethal. And so they may come and get services, but by then it's already super dangerous circumstance. And they, again, contend with many factors of overlapping identities. And the services are not often meeting all of their needs. And so one of the findings from this report that was done by Tricia Ben Goodley and B.Y. Waller says that that first, Black women may walk in a space and may be resistant to get support, but then second, they're like, okay, all right, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be persistent about it, and I'm going to work really hard to get this get this support. But then once they start going through the system, they start getting rejected. They start getting lots of no's and lots of barriers. And so then they find themselves resigned at the end of this help seeking. And so there are barriers in systems that make it hard for Black women to stay in the systems and receive the support. And one example is responding officers waiting for 30 minutes outside a Black woman's home while her husband abused her. And the officers neglected to intervene until she crawled out of her own home, right? And so how can you center intersectionality? You can prioritize and support culturally specific DV and anti-violence organizations. You can prioritize them. And I'm saying, if that's not your organization, if you don't have a culturally specific group, that's not where you're working, you still should prioritize those groups that are centering those populations and ensure that those are fully funded and accessible to survivors who are that you are helping. You should begin to build meaningful relationships with community-centered and population-specific organizations that are serving lots of different communities that are living at various intersections. You should center and resource the leadership of those in your organizations that are living at the deepest of the margins as your staff people and as the survivors who come through there, because the greatest resources for those survivors that are coming through there are the people who can experience and understand what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And when you have folks that represent those populations in leadership, that may help you determine how resources should be best spent and how to make the best set of services for them. And then you should require consistent intersectionality training, job expectations, and evaluation. Everybody should be held to it, including your board, right? And then you should decenter compounding privilege. So decenter those that sit at compounding privilege identities and prioritize those that are at the deepest of the margins. Everyone will be supported when you do that. No one will be left behind when you take that approach. And we should decenter carceral approaches, because we're seeing that carceral approaches, that criminal justice spaces are not helping for many people. And so looking to see what are non-carceral approaches that can happen. And I was inspired to develop a diagram from the original piece that I showed around what is full humanity. So you can learn about the full humanity of your staff and your survivors when you're helping survivors, and you can fill this in and you can learn these things about them and you can really understand their full humanity. And if you're interested in this diagram, I'd be more than happy to share that. And I will, I'm going to share my email address, which is info@lovelacecsi.com. And you can go to my website at lovelacecsi.com. And I'm going to stop sharing. And I realize I have left very little time for question and answer.
No, I was going to say, thank you so much for your amazing efforts to put so much information in front of everyone in such a short amount of time, in 60 minutes. So thank you so much for that. As has been, you've mentioned many times, we're going to share those slides with all the links, because I know that you've opened up a lot of different avenues for people to explore this topic. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask, we have 2 questions on the docket. I'm going to ask at least the first one, and we'll see where we have on time. But someone had brought up the idea of ageism. So, where does this fit into this conversation?
Ageism is absolutely a factor, right? Ageism is a factor and I believe that ageism is intended for understanding those who are I think at this point above 40. I'm above 50, so definitely and I started experiencing things then, but above 40, below below 18 or even below 21. And so I would say that it's as present as any of these others. It was definitely in the initial full humanity piece that I said. I just couldn't build enough streets. Like, it just would have been too many streets for me to put everything on there. So I chose 6, I did that, but there are so many others that can be there. So there's no identity that's missing here, because once again, if we're using gender as a highway, then, people who are sitting in various identities at various ages are experiencing different things at different points, and some of those some of those disadvantages or inequities that we talked about get heightened at different ages. So it's extremely important to talk about age, because it gets heightened. Youth, as we know, are under siege. Who are LGBT youth are under siege right now in many of the spaces around the country that's happening. So we know that age can create a factor, and we know that folks who are aging, who are LGBT, have less access to healthcare and services. So age is a factor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Any other closing thoughts that you'd like to send us off with?
I thought you had another question. Was there a second
one?
one?
We did have another question. We just hit our time, so I'm going to add it to, if it's okay, we kind of discussed this idea of, any additional questions. We're going to send out a survey. And one of the questions is, what questions were not answered? So Tonya has graciously offered to respond in writing to any of those additional questions. So please feel free to add that into your survey responses, and we'll include that in the shared resources folder that's going to go out within the next week, along with the slides. And Tonya, I'll get the file for that graphic that you shared at the end, so everyone can download that from the shared resources folder as well. But yeah, thank you so much, Tonya. This has been so eye-opening for me. There's so much positive comments already in the chat. So really appreciate you putting this presentation together, because I know this is the first time that you've presented this very specific presentation, right?
Yeah, it's the first time, and I do lots and lots of intersectionality trainings, but somehow there was something about really today that inspired so many things, and really, so I'm just grateful. My last words are that you can never stop learning about intersectionality. I'm a living example of that. I just learned a bunch more by putting this together, so I'm just grateful to be here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tonya, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. So glad to see so much positive feedback already in the comments. But just a reminder, we're going to send out the recording, a transcript, certificate of attendance, and all the shared resources we referenced within a week of the presentation. And if you're a call-in listener, so just those of you who are just dialing in and not seeing the visuals on your computer, send us an email to info@domesticshelters.org, just to give us a heads up that you were here, and we will include you on that distribution list. So Tonya, thank you so much for being here today. I'll let you sign off. We are going to continue on with a quick demo from Sean at CAP 60. So anyone who's able to stick around, Sean, you're welcome to hop on. But thank you so much, Tonya.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Tonya. That was really interesting. A lot of information in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for attending, and whoever's sticking around, thank you so much for that. My name is Sean Piotr. I am the product marketing manager for CAP 60, and CAP 60 is a data management system. So it's used to track not just like services and programs and such, but you can also track things like the demographics and all that. And it's used really to help pull that information out to get reports for your granting and all of that stuff. So I wanted to do just a really quick short demo to give you an idea of what the system is all about. So please, feel free to stick around and watch that little video, not video, but my little demonstration. It is live, so I will also be open to answer questions as well. And just as a little treat, anybody who does reach out to us and schedules, any agency that schedules a demo and goes through a full demonstration with us, we will send you a Starbucks gift card, kind of have a little coffee on us as a thank you for taking some time to see what we do have to offer out there. And I'll be putting my information up at the end of my little bit here. So I'm just going to take a few minutes. Let me share my screen, and I'm going to show you kind of what we do. All right, so you should be seeing my screen now. So this is what the system looks like when you log into it. This is the CAP 60 system for victim services. And what we do is, again, we track all the different kinds of data that you might have on your clients and that you might need for your grant reporting or for your funding reporting. I'm just going to quickly jump in just to give you an idea. I'm going to jump into a client really quick just to show you some of the stuff that we do. We have a full intake process. We can do intakes where you're face-to-face. You have a lot of data you can enter and capture. We also have intakes designed very quickly for like hotlines and crisis calls to enter clients in and still spend the time you need serving them instead of entering data. So it's just an example when we're in the client information area here. As I mentioned before, we can capture a lot of different information, and we can capture a lot of those demographics that Tonya was talking about. Gender, gender identification, sex, all of that stuff. We can capture those kinds of information, and all that information can be pulled out into reports, so you can see that intersection. I can't pronounce that word, but you can see that. You can pull out a report and see how many African American females were who were gay, who and so on and so forth. You can actually see all of that connection. You pull a report that shows those numbers, and you can see how they intersect and come together. So we have reports that can show that stuff, and you can capture all of that in the system here as well. So again, a lot of information you can capture on your clients, victimization details for your reportings, offender information. You can track offenders in the system, all of those different kind of things. What's really nice is we have some specialized areas for agencies that go beyond just tracking services and stuff like that. We can also track things like your shelter. I'll show you here an example. Here's for instance, this is an example showing you all the clients who are currently checked into my shelter, when they checked in, what bed they're in, all of that information. You can see bed availability, which beds are open, which ones are taken. So we have a full shelter tracking system in here. We have a tracking for transitional housing. We have counseling. There's a counseling calendar in there. You can schedule appointments with your counselors. Legal staff, again, you can schedule appointments with legal staff. You can track court cases. You can track protection orders and stuff like that. So it is a full system that can track pretty much all the data and all the information you need regarding your clients. And then we have a full reports area where you can pull all of that information out, including many of the major federal funding reports. We have the FIPSA, the full FIPSA report is in here. The full VOCA report is in here. The Stop Muskie report is in here for VAWA funding. We have, again, like I said, reports where you can pull out lots of information on services. You can see that intersection, between all the different demographics. You can pull out shelter reports. So again, this system is really designed to capture all the information you need for your reporting, and also then some, so you can do your own analysis, your own needs assessments, your own whatnot. And again, this is just a really quick peek at what we can offer. The legal options. Someone's asking to see the legal options. Of course. Here, let me go in. I'm going to go in for an actual client. So in the legal options, what we can do is we can track protection orders. So you can track, as you can see here, a lot of different data related to the protection orders. There are a few required items in here because these are things, again, that go on your federal reporting, like the VOCA reports and VAWA reports and stuff like that. So we make sure we have that information gets captured for your reporting. But you can capture counsel, paralegals, opposing counsels, judge, case numbers, all of that stuff, even things like that. And this is a protection order. We have a case tracking that's very similar, and you can again track details on the cases, witness names, place of service, things like that. And when you enter in and create these, the court cases that you're tracking, you can also upload documents directly to those cases. So you can track any kind of documentation for the court cases or for the protection orders. You can have those documents attached directly to that. And then again, you can schedule appointments. We have a full calendar system in here, so you can actually set it up. So you can say, these are my legal staff. And then you can schedule appointments with the legal staff, and they can go in and they can provide services through the appointments. They can say if the client showed up, they can enter notes, they can track all those things. So it does all of that stuff. So we can track, again, we can track legal stuff, we can track counseling, transitional housing, shelters, all of those things, in addition to, of course, tracking your services, your programs, and that kind of information as well. Okay, someone asked about the inventory. So inventory is actually for several different things. You can track in our system, there's a full inventory that you can track. You can track items that you give to clients. So you can track what you have, how many you have, where you got it, how much it costs. You can also, there's also areas like in the shelter where you can track giving those items to your clients, or in the main client area, you can track giving, what you gave to them, how many you gave, and it will automatically deduct that from the inventory. From the inventory module, so it keeps an accurate inventory for you. You can also track assets, things that you don't give away, like desks, computers. There's maintenance reports, repair reports, all incident reports. So you can track not only things that you use, but also things that stay around, vehicles and all of that kind of stuff as well. So we have a full inventory tracking in here also. They asked, someone asked on the prices. I don't have the pricing. Unfortunately, they don't let me play with money. But if you, like I said, I'm going to put up my information, and so you can, if you do a demonstration with us, we can send you the pricing. So we want you to be able to see the full system. Again, this is just a really quick overview, but they can send you pricing information and let you know what that might cost, because every agency is different, and so we want to make sure that this is something that's going to fit for you. And then we had a question, is this HMIS compatible? So it is not an HMIS system. However, we do have a bridge with WellSky. I'm trying to remember, they used to have a different name. Now they're called WellSky. We bridge with them, so information can be transferred between the systems. That way you don't have to do double entry, and you can still have your HMIS, and you can still have your full victim service tracking as well. The shelter, so there's different things. This one here, the shelter, is for when you're working with an individual or a family. As you can see, I have my client here, so I can check them in, I can put them on a waiting list, I can see their history of the times they've stayed at my shelter, I can give them inventory items, upload documents and such. Then in the victim services module here, there's a shelter section, which is the agency-wide, which I kind of showed earlier, where you can see all of your clients who are in your shelter. You can see who's on your waiting list and check them in. You can also see, again, which beds are available, which ones are taken. You can still do the inventory where you give items to people as well. You can track meal services. We do have an amenities log where you can, if there's things you give to clients you want back, you can mark down what you gave them, they can sign for it, and then you can check it back in. So you can kind of check it in and out, so you can keep track of that as well. So that's kind of what the shelter tab does. Again, Floyd, I don't have the costs, but when I put my information in, if you guys want to reach out to us, we can set up a demo, show you the full system, and then we can give you a pricing on that. That's just not something that they have me do on that one. So yeah, so again, just a really quick view. Any additional questions we have before I put my information up? And like I said, if you'd like to reach out to us, schedule a demonstration, we'll show you the full system, how it works, and we'll also give you that your agency that Starbucks gift card, kind of coffee on us for taking a little time to take a look at us. So any last questions?
Ceci, would you please go through intake briefly? Came up from Ben.
Okay, sure. Intake, definitely. So intake, we have, like I said, we have two different types of intake in here. We have one designed for a hotline or like crisis line calls. So it just captures some really quick information. So you have that information, but you can spend most of your time helping your client, because phone calls are usually quick. You don't have as much time when you're sitting as you do when you're sitting face to face with your client. So you can enter clients in anonymously. You can capture some basic information, demographic information. You can capture victimization details. You can capture services provided, and you can even give referrals and track those. Again, that's all through the hotline, just a one-page, really quick. Then we have our full intake, where it's a kind of a process that the system guides you through it. I'm going to fill out this first page. What it does here, and our system is actually designed for an unduplicated database. So what that does is Get this real quick. I'm just going to enter my client in real fast. And again, you can track a lot of different demographics, sex, as well as gender identification. And that's customizable because there are a lot of different terminologies. You're going to find a lot of the system is very customizable. You can also track, birth dates, or you can put in fake birthdays. So you have the age if they don't give you the real birthday, or even mark down that you didn't get it for your reporting. So you can track reporting, whether it's safe to contact. But again, this first page is really quick. You enter it in, and when you hit next, the system checks to see if the client is already in there. If the client's in there, you don't have to redo intake. You can just go in and start working with the client, update their information. If the client's not there, then it takes you into the process. You can see there's a safety assessment, which is optional, but we do have that built in. You can, the primary victim is going to be demographics information for the primary client. There's a shelter assessment, which again is optional, but it is there if you want to do it. You could enter in family information like addresses, household demographics, that kind of stuff. You can also enter household members. Any household members you enter can also be clients. So you don't have to do a separate intake for each household member. So like if there's a mother and 2 children and they're all going to get services, you can enter them in as one family instead of having to do 3 separate intakes with them. So it's also a nice little time saver there as well. You can track offender information, victimization information, incomes, and you can even track and provide services during your intake as well. So those are all things you can do during intake. And once it's done, it takes you into that client management area we saw a little earlier, where you have the shelter section, legal section, counselor. So and then you can go and do more with them, like putting them into your shelter or whatnot. So that's just kind of again, really quick intake in a nutshell there. Any other questions?
I will say, so obviously working with CAP 60 over the last year or so, kind of better understanding your software. 2 of the things that really stuck out to me was how awesome it is that you can just click a button and get all the reporting that you need for those federal grants, the things that take, all the different areas to fill out. And then also how much you can customize things to kind of fit what your agency is doing. So
definitely, yeah. We believe every agency is different, so we don't expect you to fit inside the same box as everybody else. So we made our system very flexible so that it can match what you need, as opposed to you trying to change to fit into it. And like she said, with reporting, just an example, we have that full VAWA. I've seen that paper. I've seen it in paper. That's the monster. We had clients who took like a month to do their VAWA, not their VAWA, to do their VOCA report, and now it takes them like 3 minutes. So it's a big change, and it's a huge time saver. And also we've had clients who have used these reports and have gotten new grants because they're able to track data that they couldn't do before, they couldn't calculate before. So it can be a really, really huge time saver, and also a way to bring in new grants. We had an agency got $100,000 grant because they could track stuff they couldn't do before. So it can be a real big thing. All right. And then, of course, just real quick, we do also have HR tracking and volunteer tracking as well. So you can track volunteer hours and stuff like that. So I'm going to put my information, our company information in there. So if you are interested in seeing a demonstration of the system, of course, and getting that Starbucks card, you can email us or call us, or even go to our website, and there's a contact us page where you can request a demo. But please, please tell them that you heard about this from the domesticshelters.org webinar. And that way we know that's where you heard it. So we'll give you that gift card as well. And it also just helps us to know that people are listening and are interested through there.
Awesome.
Right, so
well, thank you so much, Sean, for taking the time to do that. Obviously, the contact information's up there on the screen, but thank you to everyone that stuck around, and feel free to reach out to Sean if you want to schedule that demo.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. I appreciate you letting me speak.
Absolutely. Pleasure. All right. Thank you, everyone. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's presentation, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye, everyone.